it's sometimes overlooked. When the church is in crisis, it's often in crisis because there are not enough saints.
The fruits of the sacramental life that flow from a monastic or canonical community are immense. How many holy sacrifices of the Mass are offered every day? Dozens and dozens, tens of thousands of confessions. And this transforms the church, it sanctifies the church and transforms the world.
People are looking for a sort of reference point. People want to find a means of sort of attaching to some kind of spiritual tradition. This reality allowed Benedictine monasticism to then, as the Roman Empire did crumble and disappear, to be a repository not only just of Roman culture, but then of Christian cultures.
The monasteries became these places where you have libraries, you have education, you have the preservation of the sacred liturgy, you have basically everything cultural that was falling away or being lost throughout the rest of society. The monasteries were maintaining that. Monasticism preserves culture so that it can produce Christendom. Father Patrick Carter from Clear Creek Abbey, Our Lady of Clear Creek Abbey in Oklahoma. Thank you for sitting down with me for this conversation today. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. It's not often that a canon regular of Prémontré can sit down with a monk of the Benedictine family, especially the Salem congregation, and have just a normal conversation. It's one of those things that is unusual, even though we live similar kinds of religious life. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for the conversation today, Father.
Thank you, Father. I'm happy to be here.
An obvious question that I think many of our viewers and listeners will be wondering, Father, is why you're dressed in black and why am I dressed in white? So it's easy for us to know immediately, here's a Benedictine monk and here's a Norbertine canon regular, but a lot of people don't know anything about that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, just in sort of 30,000 foot terms, what is a Benedictine?
So Saint Benedict founded the monastery of Monte Cassino in 529, which incidentally we're approaching 1,500 years of the foundation of Monte Cassino, which the Benedictine world is going to celebrate as a jubilee. But the Benedictine monk follows the rule of Saint Benedict and has a life that is dedicated to prayer and work and the sacred liturgy and study, and lives in a monastery, is a part of a communal monastic life. There are other forms of monastic life that are more personal or eremitical, whereas the Benedictine life is really a communal life. It's a common life, the cenobitical, we call it. And black became, over time, the distinctive color for Benedictines. It's not the universal color. There are places where, and particular communities where there are different colors, but normally Benedictine monks wear black. A lot of the subsequent monastic and other communities that were founded in the Middle Ages were sort of a part of a reform movement, and they, in a way, wanted to be seen as distinct from the Benedictines who wore black. And so the Cistercians and the Dominicans and the Premonstratensians, like yourself, adopted white for various reasons, but partly as a sign of reform, as a sign of purity of life. And so there is this positive aspect, if you will, of wearing white as a sign of a good reform of religious life in the church. The Benedictines, we wear black. It's sort of our traditional color, and also a sign in a way that we're dead to the world and living for God rather than living for ourselves or for the world.
I was very happy to see a video that recently hit the internet called The Fire of Faith, a beautifully produced video about the Benedictine life and the charism, the many centuries long charism that you and your confreres live there at Clear Creek, but also highlighting how that's part of this amazing Benedictine tradition reaching back into the old world. Seems to me, Father, that the central thesis of that beautiful video, and maybe the central thesis of Benedictine monasticism in the West, is that Benedictine monasticism saved Europe and continues to save Europe, continues to save all of Christendom, continues to save the world, how is faith a fire that can do that?
Yeah, in some sense, I think we would want to say that not only did it save Europe, but it actually created Europe by saving Western culture. So you're at a time where the Roman Empire had expanded to its utmost limits and then was falling into decay. Culture was falling away, the arts, the science of the time, the knowledge about how to produce things, about astronomy, all kinds of things were being lost. And what Benedict does is not to try to do that. Benedict's goal isn't let's preserve the Western culture, but Benedict sets out to create a context for personal and communal sanctity. But that context already embodies some of the best aspects of Roman culture, which is sort of like a hierarchical, familial structure that has permanence and regularity in permanence in time, ongoing, but also permanence in place. And this reality allowed Benedictine monasticism to then, as the Roman Empire did crumble and disappear, to be a repository not only just of Roman culture, but then of Christian culture. So to preserve ancient texts in the manuscripts, which the idea wasn't, let's preserve ancient texts in manuscripts. It was, we need these texts because we're going to be praying these texts, we're going to be reading these texts. And so we need to make copies. If we're going to have a new foundation, we have to make copies so that we can send, so that they have a copy
because
of the
this is our
rule.
life.
This was their life. So they preserved a huge section of the patrimony of the West up to that time, both Christian and pre-Christian, and then continued to preserve all kinds of other things because they needed to farm and to build buildings. And so this slow movement, if you will, which isn't really linear from Italy coming. It's not as if it comes straight out of Italy to spread out, but it has sort of jumps. Like Augustine gets sent to Canterbury, and England has a huge flourishing of Benedictine monasticism before some of the other countries in Europe. And there's this establishment of the monastery, which then creates a stability in society, which allows for what we know as Europe to develop. And so it's this inheriting of what was great in the old world, development and preservation of the Christian patrimony that created and preserved Western civilization, but also generated Europe. And we could imagine the same kind of process in the United States, that monasticism or religious life, as it expands and grows, so it naturally does. Because
well, that's what fire does, right?
Fire
is hot. It's hot and it spreads.
It spreads because it needs to consume more. So you need more souls, you need more fuel. Fuel. And so it naturally needs to have space. So to gather vocations. And I think you see that this process of creating new communities is sort of like the fire gets hot enough and it can put out sort of
a spark comes out.
That spark then can preserve something of the original fire and have the same nature, but then go out.
And it gives heat and it gives warmth and it gives light, right? And that's that creating culture. That's creating Europe, as you said, or creating Christendom in North America.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think it's a beautiful metaphor for what religious life is supposed to be and what it's supposed to do. So Benedictine monasticism preserves culture so that it can produce Christendom, something like that maybe, huh? And that video has done very well online, tens of thousands of views so far. Why do you think it is, Father, that people are so interested in the kind of life that you and your confreres are living at Clear Creek Monastery?
I think that the current situation in the world, especially in the northern and northern hemispheres, you have abundance of material goods and a great poverty in sort of the spiritual and more the higher goods, if you will, intellectual life as well. And people are looking for a sort of reference point. People want to find a means of sort of attaching to some kind of spiritual tradition. And often they find that a religious community, a Benedictine religious community like Clear Creek, offers a contact and sort of reference point. So we have lots of people coming to visit us. We have lots of young men joining the monastery. And I think there's this hunger as we become more and decadent as a society, more sort of full of material wealth and ease. There's a growing mindset that we need to have some spiritual reference point. So we often have people that are just looking to come and make a retreat, come and experience and celebrate the liturgy with us. And so I think overall it's sort of a sign of something going on in the cultural perspective of, especially in the United States, that there needs to be these places of prayer and of dedication to God. So the monastery serves as a sort of lighthouse or beacon of God, and is kind of witnesses by the presence of the monks, by the presence of the liturgy and the dedication to God in the life of the monks, something that people are really looking to have in their own life.
Of course, this is the genius of Saint Benedict and his ancient monastic rule, because it was offering a similar, you said, sort of lighthouse, or a similar refocusing of ancient culture, where it had grown decadent in many ways in the 7th century in Europe, an opportunity to call people back to those most important things, of course, putting God back at the center, and then organizing life around that. What's different, do you think, now in post-modernity from what Saint Benedict was trying to achieve with the rule that you follow in the 7th century?
Yeah, I think there are certainly parallels in terms of the differences. So the parallels is that you have the Roman Empire, which is really at the very end. It grown large and also decadent and unable to support itself. You have these movements of peoples. The invasion of Italy by the Lombards and the Goths, and so basically society as they knew it, which was a very high-level society of the Roman city, is falling apart in the life of Saint Benedict, and he goes out into the wilderness first. He doesn't first write the rule. He goes out in the wilderness in a way to get away from the decadence of the life of a student that he found in Rome. And then he ends up, of course, step by step, ending up at Monte Cassino and establishing a monastery there, writing his rule, and kind of from there has this influence on Western civilization. I think there is a parallel now in the sense that we are facing a sort of decline of culture for various reasons in the West, and so that same kind of movement is happening where there is a tendency to look for places of culture and where the faith especially can be preserved. What's different, I believe, is that at the time of Saint Benedict, there was not the pervasive reality of Christianity. So Benedict, when he gets to Monte Cassino, has to overturn an altar and cut down these sacred groves. There's still a very strong presence of paganism in the society, in the life of Saint Benedict. What we have now is this sort of opposite movement, that Christianity is losing ground to a new paganism, which is not so much the worship of gods, but of sort of the worship of man, and a kind of dissipation of Christianity as a established reality. So in a way, the the direction is opposite, but the sort of cultural context is very similar.
It's like we're coming from different parts of this decadence, but whether it's the 7th century moment of inspiration and Benedict and Saint Benedict's, wisdom in addressing that problem, or our postmodern one where we've hit the same crossroads from, as you said, different directions. I think that's right. I do think that's right. You mentioned how the monasteries then became the kind of preservers of culture as European life, European Catholic life, and Christianity in Europe in that moment had to go into this kind of, we call it a dark age, but it's not really. I mean, that's a misnomer. I think the dark ages is not the right way to describe it, except that the monasteries became these places where you have libraries, you have education, you have the preservation of the sacred liturgy, you have basically everything cultural that was falling away or being lost throughout the rest of society. The monasteries were maintaining that. What do you think a Benedictine monastery like yours or a Premonstratensian monastery like mine can offer today in a different in some ways, but similar sort of cultural darkness? What does the monastery show to the world, do you think?
Well, I think that the role is different. So Saint Benedict had this ability to create in his rule the regularity and the context for very stable and in some sense preserved lots of aspects of Roman culture, which led to a preservation not just of the sort of Christian culture, but also of lots of the arts and other manufacturing know-how, if you will, in the sense of preserving knowledge, partly because of the stability and structure of and the continued life of a monastery over centuries. I think now it's not so much the role of the Benedictine monastery to somehow preserve crafts or arts or whatever. Certainly we can have a role, and there are times and places for that where it's still possible, but we don't have a problem with technology or artistic methods disappearing now. What we have a problem is more with a certain appreciation of sacredness, of the Holy Liturgy being celebrated in a beautiful and dignified way. These things are what are being lost more than the sort of technological and artistic patrimony of the West. And so I believe that the role is more on the side of this really being a representative of the spiritual and dedication to God, rather than being properly a center of a repository of knowledge and books and things like that, which really isn't our role right now, or being a repository of knowledge about the arts and architecture and this kind of thing. But it's more really representing the primacy of the spiritual, the primacy of dedication to God. And that's really what people are hungering for, looking for.
As you're speaking there, Father, I'm reminded about how important the role of Gregorian chant and sacred music is in your particular congregation of the Benedictine order, the Salem congregation. You can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but as I understand it, Salem in France was the place where Gregorian chant was collected, annotated, then published at the beginning of, I think, the 20th century, late 19th century into the early 20th century. And that amazing work of preserving centuries old Gregorian chant and then singing it is something that you and your confreres very much are you're the heirs of this tradition. Salem then of course bore fruit in Faucambeau, and Faucambeau has borne fruit in Clear Creek. And so that's just one cultural touch point, cultural liturgical touch point, which is so much part of the patrimony of Christendom that we have in our hands right now, certainly as Premonstratensians similarly, but Benedictines especially, because of the fact that your chant is the chant of the Roman Church. You are the Catholic singers of Gregorian chant. What is that like for a young American man, mostly young American men, I suppose, who join Clear Creek, or maybe even just for Americans, North Americans, Western people who show up at Clear Creek, and here is this ancient cultural patrimony maintained, cultivated, and lived liturgically. What does that do for them? What does that offer them, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that this reception, just to fill in maybe a couple of details.
Okay,
so
please.
The Dom Guéranger founded Solesmes after the French Revolution in a time when basically Benedictine monasticism had disappeared in France. And one of the things he saw as important as part of his life work wasn't precisely the founding the monastery, but you had basically a plethora of different Gallican rites in France where each diocese basically had its own liturgy. And so Dom Guéranger is very well known, in addition to other things, for promoting, if you will, the Roman rite, a kind of unity of celebration and the nobility and kind of simple purity of the Roman rite. And sort of, I think, very much growing out of that, then mostly after the death of Dom Guéranger, at Solesmes, they became interested in restoring the chant. So essentially, you still had the Gregorian chant, but it had been modified, made much more ornate over time, especially during the Renaissance period. And with the rise of especially of cameras that one could very easily move around, some of the monks started going around Europe to libraries, getting copies of chant manuscripts from the Middle Ages, making copies, and then they could go back to Solesmes and start looking at them and comparing them and interpreting them, something that hadn't really been done before. And this resulted in a kind of restoration. It wasn't that it was lost, but that they were able to go back and find these primitive, very beautiful melodies and recreate, if you will, these texts, these musical lines. And this was a fabulous success. Obviously, it brought a lot of attention to Solesmes, and people recognized this sort of primitive, beautiful nature of some of these melodies that go back to the 8th or 9th century. Many of them written in the 11th or 10th to 12th century, maybe. But really from the Middle Ages and sort of just before the Middle Ages. So that all being said, this is a sort of heritage that Fontgombault received from Solesmes, and then that Clear Creek received from Fontgombault, as you said. What one experiences with this music is sort of the immediate kind of beauty of it. It has a simple nature, but it has a sort of profound expression of the liturgical text, and is, in some sense, because of its simplicity, quite accessible. It's a sort of sung expression of the liturgical text. And so approaching it, I think, is very easy for the faithful who come and visit our monastery, and also for the young men who are thinking of entering. On the other side, it is something of a challenge as well, because of the sort of lack of musical education that is often found in the schools. We have to maybe do more work than someone would have had to have done 100 years ago in terms of training the young men that do come in order to be able to sing Gregorian chant. It's not that it's particularly complicated, but it does require some training of the voice, of knowledge of music and musical signs. And so, but generally, it's a delight to be able to sing Gregorian chant, and also has a power of creating a kind of interior spiritual peace that I think the simple recitation of the office or a simple read mass doesn't create. It has this sort of soothing capability that brings one to prayer, brings one to God, and sort of creates an order and beauty in the soul both by singing it and also by listening to it.
You know, there's I think this is something that, going back to an earlier part of our conversation here, that patrimony from Rome, that Romanitas, that Benedictine life and all monastic life, including premonstratensian life, maintains through these centuries of the vicissitudes of history. There's men sing. That's what men do. Men are supposed to sing. If you're comparing the sexes, men are the ones who sing. They sing when they are marching. They sing when they are working in the field. They sing when they're on campaign. It's a male quality. It's something about the male part of the human nature which sings. And I notice as an American man growing up, having grown up in the late 20th century in the American Catholic Church, probably because of a lot of the history, the way that Catholicism came into North America with the missionaries who brought it and the immigrants who were there, Catholic men no longer sing. That's something that somehow our culture has really defaced the truth that the men are the ones who are supposed to be singing in society. And so I saw, certainly I've seen at our Abbey, that young men who come to join our monastery, there's a hurdle they have to clear first, which is it's okay for a man to sing. And then once they clear that hurdle, then they start to understand, actually, I can pray in a much more profound way if I sing when I pray. And so there's this growth. You talked about the fact that we don't form our young people in music, and I think that's right. But part of it is that we also deform our, especially male vocations, culturally, that there's this obstacle before they ever get on board with even the idea of a religious vocation or a monastic vocation. So that opening up of a new world of interior peace and prayer that comes through Gregorian chant, where we have a lot of work to do to overcome that. What was your own personal experience of, do you remember a moment in your life, your vocational journey, when you realized it was okay to sing and in fact that you want to sing to pray?
Yeah, I would say I'm exceptional, and I don't follow the generality. So myself, I actually was in music. I sung when I was younger. So I was in choirs when I was in high school. Okay. And so I had an experience both of Gregorian chant, polyphony, and other music as well. So I came already, and then also in college I had been a part of a group where we sang Gregorian chant. Mm-hmm. So I had a very strong appreciation already of sacred music and Gregorian chant before arriving at the monastery. But I do think that there's something about the monastic mode, if you will, of singing Gregorian chant that one does have to learn. Mm. So it's one thing to learn how to sing the notes and how to follow the rhythms. It's another thing to really be praying and embracing the chant as a prayer, and as an integral part of the liturgy. And so I think there was still something for me to learn. I think that there's a formation that goes on for the young man who becomes a monk in order to really, really learn to pray and make this a prayer, make this one's prayer. Not that I think that, the best musicians are able to do that as well. But it's certainly not where one starts. So you have to start with the music and the rhythm and these kind of things. So I think there is something there that in our society that's lacking. Another aspect is I think partly connected with this modernity thing, which we don't realize that in any culture, that's older, that was older than 100 years ago, there would have been live music and singing as a part of practically everything. Mm-hmm. There would have always been singers, musicians, and I'm not talking about remotely, but concretely in small groups, in homes, in family gatherings. There was a presence of music that was very strong. Mm. And we don't realize in the West how much that's changed because of radio, television, and now the internet, that we've been moved away one step from real live music, and it doesn't have the same effect on us, I think, physically and spiritually, to listen to music on the radio. There's an advantage. We can listen to almost anything. We have access to practically everything. Mm-hmm. But it's not the same as being in the same room as someone singing or as someone playing, a cello. It's not going to vibrate your soul the way that the instrument itself, a few feet away would. And so I think that there's something about, if you will, a group of men singing. People come, they can experience that. They can't experience that almost anywhere else. And where they can experience live music, it's often so distorted by amplification, by the poor quality that it's found in. That so people find something that I think responds very accurately to a deep sort of human need that they can't find anywhere else.
We take a little bit of a deep dive into the corner of chant and Gregorian chant, specifically in the monastic context. It's such an important part of your patrimony at Clear Creek, Father. But and that's certainly, I think, one of the very important gifts that Clear Creek Monastery offers to the world. But I think that we need to speak about that a little bit more specifically too. Liturgical music and chant is very much, I think, misunderstood in Catholicism more widely. We often think, well, if we have a great choir who can practice carefully through the week and then sing the Gregorian propers at Mass on Sunday, or put together some of the wonderful polyphonic music of our tradition, of our patrimony, for the motets and the things that amplify the experience of the Catholic faithful person in their parish church on Sunday. That's great. That's great. I'm not going to disparage that at all. But it comes from your life and my life. All of that comes from this lived monastic experience of sung prayer. So the Mass is the centerpiece of that. But then we have the Divine Office all day and into the night, which is also sung with this chant tradition. And liturgical music, sacred music, is wonderfully uplifting, but it's not merely something that is the background music of Catholic life. It actually comes from, in the hierarchy of things, in like all things Catholic having their hierarchy, it comes from the lived experience of the monk in the choir, the lived experience of the canon in the choir. Just anything to say about that, about how this beautiful gift is, first of all, life transforming and then shared.
Yeah, it occurs to me that we should mention the rule of Saint Benedict.
Of course.
Right, where, Benedict is sort of giving a spiritual testament, if you will, to establish and create the parameters for what he sees as the monastic life. And he spends a huge amount of time laying out where the psalms are going to be said when and how many psalms and the structure of the liturgical office that really very much shaped the liturgical office that we have in the Roman Church. And so I think it's interesting to see that already at the beginning of Benedictine monastic life in the West and in Europe, you have this emphasis on the liturgy as being the central thing. And that it's sung, that it's chanted and prayed was also something that St. Benedict doesn't talk a lot about the nature of the singing, but he's presuming that he presumed that everyone knew that it was going to be sung and that there were accepted melodies, etc. And so really in the very nature of the Benedictine vocation, the Benedictine monastic life, is this presence of music in the liturgy as the integral part of the liturgy. So it's not something added on or something that was just developed later. It did develop, it did progress to a certain degree, but it didn't come, the development that happened was a development that occurred out of something that already existed.
Yes, it's not an afterthought.
Yeah, so there's a reception also from the Hebraic singing of the Psalms that the apostles receive and hand on to the church, and that the church receives, and sort of the monks, take very much in that vein. In my own experience, I would say the real dedication to the life of singing every day, the office in choir, is quite transformative. Just the fact that it's a sung prayer brings one into the prayer more, but it also has a power of uniting a community, for instance, that's singing together every day. It has the power of creating peace among brothers, of bringing one towards God, and this is something that is very precious, and it can't be substituted with some other method of prayer.
Yes, I'm reflecting back to my own years as a novice, many years ago now. I remember the first experience of regular sung liturgical prayer, many times a day for many weeks and months, in the first taste of religious life. And I remember thinking, sometimes that was quite tedious, and challenging. You think, well, why am I only thinking about what we're going to be eating for dinner during Vespers rather than what I'm saying and singing at Vespers, And it's a transformation that takes a long time to have and to seemingly bear any fruit in one's personal religious life. And I can't imagine my religious life now without the sung liturgical offices. It's sometimes where I feel like I pray at all. If I feel like I pray at all, that's often where I feel like I pray, So in this hierarchy of Catholic things and Catholic ways of life, what is it, do you think, that the lay people who come to Clear Creek or who come to St. Michael's Abbey, they're not living our life thoroughly from the inside like we have been doing for a long time, you and I, but they're supposed to, in the hierarchical structure of the church, they're supposed to receive something from us, and God is supposed to be able to use us to affect something in their life too. What is that?
First of all, I think that people that come really do have the opportunity to pray with us.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Even if one isn't singing, just being present, experiencing, praying along with a monastic choir or a choir of canons singing the liturgy is a real blessing. And lots of people come precisely for that reason, whether for a stay or to move, near the Abbey. And so the first thing is just that itself is a real good for the church. At the same time, one aspect is also there is a sort of asceticism. If you're singing in choir, you're not doing something else. You're not spending time, reading. You're not, whatever it is, you're not doing something for yourself. So there's a certain degree where it really is a sacrifice to spend all that time singing every day. But the monastic presence in the choir is really a presence which represents the church. So the church as a whole, the universal church, is there praying with the monastic choir, just as it is in a different way when someone's praying the divine office on their own. But the monastic choir represents in a more perfect way because you have a group of people, and so it represents this presence and this continual prayer of the church, and brings monks towards holiness. And it's sort of hard to get at this intangible good that the church is provided in having holy priest, holy religious. But it's something that we shouldn't discount in the sense that having holiness in the church profits the whole church, even if we don't see it. And it's sometimes overlooked that when the church is in crisis, it's often in crisis because there are not enough saints. And those saints don't have to be great preachers like St. Vincent Ferrer or something like that. They can be mystics like Therese of Lisieux or St. Hildegard or St. Gertrude. There's something real that's beyond what we see and what we know. And this union and closeness to God is the most fruitful reality in the church. But often we forget about it because it's not something we can count and not something we can just verify whether it's there or not. We see it in history, we see it sometimes in the great saints, but it's hard to just say, oh, well, it's here or it's there. I hope that Clear Creek is developing this kind of holiness, which often comes not in the individual, but in the community and in the context. And if we can do that, we can provide something immeasurable for the church that our other work wouldn't even touch.
Yes. The fact that it's intangible and immeasurable, you can't count it, that's such a powerful counter witness to the spirit of the individual that pervades American life, postmodern American life. We like balance sheets. We like balance sheets and something quantifiable and tangible, and we have to be able to chart it on an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And so this is not the wisdom of the saints, is it? And I'm reminded of, I had a conversation with a young man. I want to turn eventually here to what the country needs from Clear Creek, but just before we do that, I had a conversation with a young man not too long ago, well, several years ago, like many young men who are converting to our holy faith and coming from atheism, coming from agnosticism, coming from complete and utter materialistic secularism. People, they're looking for some kind of truth and they're finding it, thanks be to God, in Christianity and also in religious life. And this man was trying to decide should he be an Orthodox Christian or should he be a Catholic Christian and so forth. We met a number of times. He told me one time, he said, well, I visited some monasteries, but I asked myself, where are the elders, to use that kind of Orthodox language, that that you have a good monastery when there are holy elders in the monastery who are helping with spiritual direction. They might even be able to read souls in confession. They're transformed by the grace of God, the grace of Jesus Christ, that they're living in the religious state. And I think that the crisis of the lack of holiness in the church begins with a crisis of the lack of holiness, or maybe a forgetting that we're supposed to be striving for holiness at all in monastic life and canonical life. That's a great gift we can all offer back to the church and to the secular world as well, because it's telling young men, but also young women, it's telling everybody, there's much more to this life than what you can see or count or reckon on a spreadsheet or a balance sheet. I've heard that there are many families, many people. I've not had the pleasure of visiting Clear Creek myself yet. I hope to someday. People are moving there. They're picking up their families and they're moving there. What do you think that says about our country?
Clear Creek is out in the country, and often young families are looking for a place where they can give their children and their families a wholesome context for growing up. It's not so easy in a modern city with all of the challenges that brings, modern education in the schools. So there's often this search for where can I raise my children, where can I have access to the sacraments. And Clear Creek from the very beginning had various families and groups, people that have come and moved out near the monastery, partly because we're out in the country and there was land available, but also because they want to be near the monastery. They appreciate this access to the sacraments, to the beauty of the liturgy, and then also the context of having other families, other young Catholics around, lots of other children. And so this has really drawn a lot of people to Cherokee County, Oklahoma, which is a place where you don't have a lot of Catholics and you don't have sort of support structure that some other parts of the United States would have in terms of Catholicism. But having this small community, which is more like a village, and you have families and young people and children and grandparents, and it has been very, very positive for those families that have come, and it provides this alternative place where one can raise a family, where one can have this Catholic experience, and also gives access to another modern solution for a modern problem is just being sort of city bound and being surrounded by concrete. And so getting out of the being blocked in this sort of concrete fake world and being out closer to nature, having some land to do a little farming or gardening or raising of animals. This is something that is extremely healthy for everyone, but also for raising children, so that we understand that chicken doesn't come from the supermarket, but from a
the
bird.
backyard. Yes.
And so I think that there's some real need to be closer to nature, which people find also in a healthy, natural way, not in an ideological way, but just to have access to it, which you don't have in a modern city.
It's really true. Yeah, the country is having at least in North America, we have less and less of that. We're city-bound people. I like the way that you put that, city-bound, trapped by the concrete all around us. There's, I think that there are moments throughout history we've seen precedents of this before in both of the traditions that we both represent, many, many centuries old. I read, you've probably read this book too, The Canticle for Leibowitz, late 20th century novel. I don't remember who wrote that book, but the interesting sort of fantasy, even kind of post-apocalyptic fantasy book. But the main protagonist of that book is the monastery. The people are coming and going through history, and you get these little vignettes of a monastery's existence through time, and it's providing something that the decadent or absent culture needs to be reminded of. This is just exactly what you just described, and people in your experience at Clear Creek are responding to that call, picking up their families, moving. I've gotten to know the little community surrounding the very, very ancient Benedict Bayern monastery in Bavaria. That's 8th century, I believe. I think it was maybe the 4th or 5th monastery after Monte Cassino. You would probably know better than I. But a similar example of what you're describing in 21st century Cherokee County, Oklahoma, that happened in 8th century Bavaria with, you put a monastery down and all of a sudden life begins to grow around it, but not just any life, but really human life, fulfilling life with agriculture and prayer and families and people who are close to nature and close to God. We need much more of that, Father, I think, in our world. So there's only one Clear Creek Abbey, and there's only one St. Michael's Abbey right now. Is it enough for our country?
I think it's not. I mean, I think we really, if you look at the numbers, the Catholic Church in the United States has a very large presence. We have millions and millions of people, and if you want to limit that to two small communities of maybe 100 or so members, no, we certainly need more. And as you've sort of built your beautiful Abbey in California, we're trying to work towards having a similar presence in Oklahoma, but then also looking beyond. We would like to have the possibility of moving out beyond Oklahoma, and so there's some development on that front. And as we have more and more young men coming every year, a monastic community has a certain limit. So in theory, a monastery could become 200 monks, but at that point it becomes more of an institution and not so much of a family. And so Dom Guéranger and sort of the wisdom that we've received, if you will, in the Salem congregation is that there's sort of a limit to this, and 60, 70 monks gets to be a kind of limit where it still really feels like a family. You get beyond that, and it has been, we have had communities, Salem, Fontainebleau, they've had moments when they really did get beyond that. And so our monastic family has been blessed in the last 30 or 40 years to have already 5 or 6 monastic foundations, including Clear Creek, obviously in 1999. And so we're looking already, having been established in 2000 and then raised to an abbey in 2010. we're kind of already looking forward. Can we look to expand the monastic presence in the U.S.? And obviously, we need support. We need vocations. But as we mature as a community, I think that's a real possibility. And let's say not just one. Maybe we could have several. Maybe we could spread out throughout the country. Maybe the Norbertines as well could, and we can populate like Europe. The United States. That would be a great thing. I think it's a possible thing. I think that that's what should happen in many ways, and very well could happen if we're faithful to our charism, if we're authentic in who we are and what we are. The young men will come and will be forced to expand, and that would be a great grace.
We're wrestling with these questions in our own Abbey community at St. Michael's, and putting out the tentative feelers of a daughter foundation in the middle of the country in the state of Illinois. And so this is how monastic and canonical life is supposed to expand and grow. And like you said, this is what happened in Europe. And why couldn't it, or why shouldn't it happen in parts of the world where we haven't seen that kind of expansion of specifically monastic religious life? There's definitely the need, I think, for this reminding of our post-Christian and postmodern culture of the most important things. And as you said, people are responding. The families who move, the young who move to be with you, the young men who are joining you. It's such a beautiful and edifying thing. I often think, well, God can do anything. He could make the whole church holy just because of one monastic community that's really living the vocation thoroughly and well. But he's probably going to do it through a multiplicity of them. It seems to be more fitting, doesn't it?
Sure, yeah. It's you need not just the holiness, but you need the contact of people with the religious life. And I think there's a hunger for that as well that isn't proper necessarily to the monastic reality.
Right.
It used to be that we had sisters and brothers in the schools teaching. We had lots of priests and religious everywhere running hospitals. And the Catholic faithful had normal contact in a day-to-day life with the religious life. And unfortunately, we're in a sort of low tide in terms of that contact. But people like it. People want it. It sort of brings the faithful back to the importance of God and of the spiritual life. So I think there's a hunger. People would be delighted. And we have, on occasion, certainly multiple times, we've had groups of faithful come to our abbey and say, look, come here. We'll buy you property. We'll take care of you. We'll help you get set up. There's a real desire for that in a lot of places. And it won't be a question of finding somewhere where there aren't people willing to be receptive of presence. It's quite the opposite. It's trying to whittle it down to
where can we go?
Who do we have to say no to? And there's something very, very beautiful about that. But also it shows that there is a real need. And in a way we have to think in a sort of missionary way, I think, even though it's more of a monastic spirit, but that we want to see ourselves expand. And it would be beautiful if the United States was populated with monasteries the way that Europe is.
Yes, it seems to me, Father, there's this marvelous balance, which is a very Catholic balance between that faith that we know that even one monastery alone could save the world, as it were. That grace is powerful, and that holiness diffuses itself through the whole mystical body. And then also the fact that, as you said, that real contact that people want to have and in a certain sense should be able to have with consecrated religious wherever they are, those two things are very much true at the same time. I think often about, a community like yours or a community like mine, I ask myself, how many holy sacrifices of the Mass are offered every day? Dozens and dozens. How many, in our case, because we have a more apostolic slant to the canonical life, tens of thousands of confessions and preaching in however many parishes. The fruits of the sacramental life that flow from a monastic or canonical community are immense, an immense treasure that is offered to the whole church. And Clear Creek is certainly one of those epicenters of that. Mass offered every day in a beautiful and dignified way by every, priest, monk, hiero monk in the monastery. It's really a gift to the church that religious life brings in this way. And this transforms the church, it sanctifies the church and transforms the world. So thank you for your vocation, and thank you for your yes to God at Clear Creek, and thank you for your confreres. I love that the ancient ways of being a male religious in the church, which are the Augustinian canons regular and the Benedictine monks, continue to support one another. When my order was founded in the 12th century, St. Bernard of Clairvaux was working on the renewal of Benedictine life, and St. Norbert was working on the renewal of Augustinian canonical life. And they were very good friends, and they wrote letters to one another, and they supported one another. We don't all have to be monks, and we don't all have to be canons, but the church needs monks, and she needs canons. And so I think we're in this together, Father, and it's a joy to speak with you and to witness your beautiful example. So thank you for that.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Father.